Today we're going to talk about metacognition. This involves the process of highlighting and annotating, which is probably something you've done in your other English classes. Metacognition is the awareness and understanding of your own thought process. It's important to be aware of your thought process as you're reading because this can help you become a better reader. Highlighting and annotating helps facilitate metacognition in that it forces you to examine your own thought process, but it also shows your teacher what's going on inside of your head so that he or she can help you improve your reading skills. Highlighting and annotating work together. You can't have one without the other, and we're going to do lots of highlighting and annotating this year in English too. Highlighting occurs when you select specific text that you find to be important. It can be done using an actual highlighter, or possibly if you don't have a highlighter, you could underline the text with a pen or pencil. Annotating occurs when you make a note about something that you read. It shows your teacher what was happening inside of your head as you were reading the specific text that you highlighted. In English 2, we have created an annotation guide for you to help facilitate the highlighting and annotating process. So you're going to be able to use this annotation guide throughout the year on any text that you read. So on the left-hand side, you'll see a column that says, "What can I highlight?" And on the right, there is a column that says, "How do I annotate this text?" So when you highlight, you might find a sentence that reflects the main idea or the author's purpose or message. You could highlight that sentence, and then for your annotation, you could label the main idea, or you could summarize this sentence or these sentences in your own words. Perhaps you find a phrase or sentence that you find to be interesting or surprising. You could highlight that in the text, and for your annotation, you could briefly explain why you find these phrases or sentences interesting or surprising. You might find vocabulary words that are either unfamiliar or important words. You could then highlight those words, and for your annotation, you could define them either using context clues or you could use the dictionary. Possibly also you could explain what that word reveals about a character or a situation, a setting, or a conflict. If you have an aha moment as you read, you could highlight the text where you had the aha moment, and then for your annotation, you can write down what you just realized when you had that aha moment. Perhaps you find an important detail about setting, character, or conflict. You could highlight that important detail, and then for your annotation, you could describe what you learn about the setting, character, or conflict. Maybe as you're reading, you find phrases and sentences that really make you think and wonder because they're confusing or they reveal something new. You could highlight that text, and then for your annotation, you can actually ask yourself a question. And the cool thing about this is that you don't even have to answer the question. It's totally normal and appropriate to ask questions as you read. Perhaps as you're reading, you find a phrase or sentence that reminds you of something outside of the story, so it jogs your memory. You could highlight that phrase or sentence, and then for your annotation, you can describe the connection that you see between the highlighted text and whatever it is that you were reminded of. Maybe you're reminded of something about yourself, or other people that you know, or something that's out there in the world, or perhaps some other story, a book, a movie, a TV show that you've seen. Maybe as you're reading, you read about a striking phrase or sentence, and it created a mental image or a visual in your head. You could highlight that, and then you could even, for your annotation, draw a picture of that visual representation. You can draw whatever image was created in your mind. Perhaps you read and see text features or structures such as chapter titles or visual elements or even characteristics of the genre, whether you're reading literary or nonfiction text, that cause you to make predictions. You could highlight what you see there as the text feature or structure, and then you can briefly state your prediction for your annotation. We'll look at text features and structures this year, so don't worry if that one seems a little confusing. So let's learn it. We're going to practice this process by reading a Langston Hughes short story called Thank You, Ma'am. I'm going to switch over to my ladybug, and I'm going to show you how to do this in real time. So I'm going to read the story to you, and I am going to show you how I would highlight and annotate this text as I go. So this is called Thank You, Ma'am by Langston Hughes. She was a large woman with a large purse that had everything in it but hammer and nails. And so the very first thing that I see is the fact that she had a really large purse with everything in it but hammer and nails. I'm going to highlight this because when I read this, it reminded me of me. I have a huge purse with everything in it. And this woman already reminds me of me. So here's my highlight and here's my annotation. See, they work together. It had a long strap, and she carried it slung across her shoulder. It was about 11 o'clock at night, and she was walking alone when a boy ran up behind her and tried to snatch her purse. So when I read this, that he tried to snatch her purse, I focused in on the word snatch because he was grabbing it. He was taking it from her. And it was her purse. I also focused in on this vocabulary word. And this one tells me that he probably is stealing. It's not accidental. He's stealing. And so I'm kind of alarmed as I'm reading. The strap broke with the single tug the boy gave it from behind, but the boy's weight and the weight of the purse combined caused him to lose his balance. So, instead of taking off full blast as he had hoped, the boy fell on his back on the sidewalk. So right here, he fell on his back on the sidewalk. This made me think to myself, he doesn't seem like he really knows what he's doing, and so maybe he's never done this before. I actually asked myself a question. Maybe he's never done this before. And this is a good example of how you can ask yourself a question and you don't even need an answer for it. The large woman simply turned around and kicked him right square in his blue jean sitter. Then she reached down, picked the boy up by his shirt front, and shook him until his teeth rattled. So when I read this, I was really surprised. This woman reached down and picked him up by the shirt front, and I was surprised in this moment because I was not expecting the tables to turn. So when I wrote out my annotation this time, I put an exclamation point because I wanted to show my surprise. After that, the woman said, "Pick up my pocketbook, boy, and give it here." She still held him, but she bent down enough to permit him to stoop and pick up her purse. Then she said, "Now ain't you ashamed of yourself?" So when I read this, there were several different words and phrases that I picked out that told me about the woman. She said, "Pick up my pocketbook, boy. Give it here." So she's giving directions. She's still got a hold of him. She even permitted him. Did you see that? It's like she allowed him to do this, but she's still in control. And then she questions him, "Now ain't you ashamed of yourself?" And so I made a note to myself about this woman. When I do this, I usually just use the equal sign. She is in control, commanding, and she's intimidating. Firmly gripped by his shirt front, the boy said, "Yes'm." The woman said, "What did you want to do it for?" The boy said, "I didn't aim to." She said, "You a lie." By that time 2 or 3 people passed, stopped, turned to look, and some stood watching. "If I turn you loose, will you run?" asked the woman. "Yes'm," said the boy. "Then I won't turn you loose," said the woman. She did not release him. "I'm very sorry, lady, I'm sorry," whispered the boy. "Uh-huh. And your face is dirty. I got a great mind to wash your face for you. Ain't you got nobody home to tell you to wash your face?" "No'm," said the boy. This means no, ma'am. So, a couple of things here that happened in my head as I was reading. She said, "If I turn you loose, will you run?" And he was like, "Yes, I will." And so when I read this, and the woman said, "Well, then I won't turn you loose," I literally laughed out loud, so I'm going to write down LOL. Another thing that I saw here, there was a shift, and it was kind of a sad shift. She said, "Ain't you got nobody at home to tell you to wash your face?" And the boy said no. And so at first, I was frustrated with this boy because he's stealing, and I don't like that. And I kind of thought he was getting what he deserved, but then there was this shift to sympathy in my mind as I was reading, because now I feel sorry for him. It becomes clear he doesn't have anybody at home to take care of him. We'll turn the page, and here's page 2. "Then it will get washed this evening," said the large woman, starting up the street, dragging the frightened boy behind her. He looked as if he were 14 or 15, frail and willow-wild in tennis shoes and blue jeans. The woman said, "You ought to be my son. I would teach you right from wrong. Least I can do now is to wash your face. Are you hungry?" When I read this, I was again kind of shocked. She's telling him what to do, almost in a motherly sense. And so I questioned, why does she want to help him after he tried to rob her? "Noam," said the boy, the being-dragged boy, "I just want you to turn me loose." "Was I bothering you when I turned that corner?" asked the woman. "Noam." "But you put yourself in contact with me," said the woman. "If you think that contact is not going to last a while, you got another thought coming. When I get through with you, sir, you are going to remember Mrs. Luella Bates Washington Jones." And here's where we learn her name for the first time. When I read this, I realized something else about this woman. She very forcefully says, when I get through with you, you are going to remember me. And so I realize she's tough. Sweat popped out on the boy's face, and he began to struggle. Mrs. Jones stopped, jerked him around in front of her, put a half Nelson around his neck, and continued to drag him up the street. So when I read half Nelson, I vaguely recognized that as a wrestling term, but I actually had to Google what that meant because I wasn't totally sure. And it is a type of wrestling hold. And so that's kind of an example of a vocabulary word where you may actually need to Google what it means or look in a dictionary for what it means. When she got to her door, she dragged the boy inside, down a hall, and into a large kitchenette furnished room at the rear of the house. She switched on the light and left the door open. The boy could hear other roomers laughing and talking in the large house. Some of the doors were open, too. So he knew he and the woman were not alone. The woman still had him by the neck in the middle room. She said, "What's your name?" "Roger," answered the boy. "Then, Roger, you go to that sink and wash your face," said the woman, whereupon she turned him loose at last. Roger looked at the door, looked at the woman, looked at the door, and went to the sink. I saw this, and I saw that the italics suddenly had been used. That was a choice very specifically made by the author, and so I don't want to ignore that. So I see here that the italics emphasize his surprise decision. I really expected him to run when he had the opportunity, but he chose not to, and so that was surprising, and I think that's why the author chose to use the italics. But this is something I realized in my head as I was reading. "Let the water run until it gets warm," she said. "Here's a clean towel." "You going to take me to jail?" asked the boy, bending over the sink. "Not with that face. I would not take you nowhere," said the woman. "Here I am trying to get home to cook me a bite to eat, and you snatch my pocketbook. Maybe you ain't been to your supper either, late as it be. Have you?" "There's nobody home at my house," said the boy. And so again, this part here created this feeling of sympathy for the boy. Okay, so what I want you to do is open up the PDF that you have in your folder that contains the story, Langston Hughes's Thank You, Ma'am. I've read the first 2 pages for you, and we've practiced highlighting and annotating together. And I want you to read the rest of the story. It's short, there's not much left. You're going to finish reading the story, and then you're going to take the quiz. And on the quiz, you're going to be asked a couple of highlighting and annotating questions about what happens at the end of the story and your thought process as you were reading.